Welcome to the Triple W Show. I'm your host, Terence Wilgrass. Here we have Michael Walker, who tries to be smart, and George Winter, such a cool dude. Here we ask very big, important questions, but nobody actually cares, except from our one fan, Joel Overton, who's currently filming. Now, on today's topic, we'll be answering questions about GMOs, whether it's morally right or wrong. And if for those dunces out there, a GMO is a genetically modified organism. And our first question is, what effects do GMOs have on humans? And we'll start with Michael.
GMOs will not have that much effect on humans. You know, it's something many people bring up the fact that GMOs give people diseases and they taste disgusting and they're all mutated and rotten and bleh. But they're not. They have very little difference to real food. And if you take a plant and you put insecticides and things on it, you'll probably find that GMOs may even be safer than real food to eat.
I can just disagree with that. Many tests on animals, which are the closest thing that we can get onto humans, show that they cause several health issues like infertility, immune dysregulation, accelerated aging, and changes in the liver, kidney, and spleen.
May I ask you, how many genetically modified foods would you have to have eaten before then? Would you have to have lived on a diet of purely genetically modified foods until then? I mean, look at all the foods that don't need to be genetically modified. Genetically modified is good, but you don't just need to live completely off it.
I agree. A study on mice showed after eating GM soy and changing back to GM soy, their livers showed a decrease in size. Someone's anonymous. They showed a decrease in size after the GM soy affected their livers, yet it turned back to normal. So a healthy diet between GM foods and non-GM foods would be fine.
Can GMOs make diseases stronger? And we'll go for against GMOs?
Well, I could say they probably would. Many tests, there was a test on mice again, they love mice, don't they? Showing that it could increase that in a certain area where GM foods were used, many more people got autism and infertility.
And here we are. And Michael, what's your response to this?
I don't understand how GMOs can strengthen diseases. If you were to eat a GMO, it is just as likely as any other food to, in fact, damage your immune system. I don't understand where you get this from. I mean, let's just look at how genetically modified organisms are made, shall we? Right. So, to begin with, they take the plant, which they find, and they look for the desired gene for which they want. So we'll take the example of in the 1970s in Hawaii, some papayas, there was an intense disease going on, putting Hawaii in a financial crisis. Lots of people were beginning to starve because of this, called the ring spot virus. So they identified the gene of the virus, which would prevent the virus from happening. They then took that, isolated that gene from the organism, and they shot it at higher speed from a bombardment device into the nucleus of the zygote of the organism which is going to be modified. And this is called transformation. They then let this develop into a seed and they plant this. After this is finished, they then selectively breed these crops. Now, if this is done, they can prevent diseases from spreading through the crops. I don't see why it can be done, why it can't be done, in fact, to make a food which would strengthen your immune system, if anything.
Well, you just said that it can't be as bad as natural foods or any other food that we may eat. But we use a lot of pesticides, and pesticides are known to kill many birds after eating the crop or any of the bugs that eat the crop. Also, it is shown that GM crops can spread extremely easily and can leave farmers with no income because they will lose their market after GM crops are spread from adjacent fields to theirs making them possibly lose tons of profit and may have to end up on the streets. And if you think about it, in a developing country where you're going to have some crops that might not grow as frequently and as fast or as much of a yield, and you need it from GM crops, then those GM crops are going to spread to the other adjacent fields, which means that country is going to end up with mostly GM crops, which means then most people needing food are going to need those crops, but then they're going to be eating GM crops, which then is going to build up their disease, it's going to build up the strength of the disease, which means you've got more of a chance of getting infertility, immune dysregulation, accelerated aging, changes in the liver, kidney and spleen.
I'm going to tackle what you said in two separate parts. For example, the first thing you said was that using GM crops seemed to increase the amount of pesticides. They use pesticides in GM crops, is that what you said?
No,
because GM crops actually reduces the amount of pesticides you need, as the genetic modification can strengthen the crops and protect them against these diseases and issues. The second thing, you spoke about the genetic modification, the GM crops, from spreading into the crops of other people so that they can lose their money. Well, I've got two things to say to that. The first thing is that if you were to promote the use of genetic modification and show its advantages compared with the other crops, many farmers in organic crops will turn to genetic modifying crops, meaning that there won't be so much of an issue of crop spreading. The second point is the people getting diseases, if they begin to rely on genetically modified crops, could not happen, because if you were to alter the genes of a crop to increase the amount of vitamins in it, for example, due to places in the Philippines where people were solely relying on rice, the poorer people, solely relying on rice to eat, they generated a crop called the golden rice, which included vitamin A, because lots of people, rice usually lacks vitamin A, and lots of people in that country were struggling due to vitamin A deficiencies, which can lead to blindness and various other problems. If you add vitamin A into the rice, it provides a cheap alternative for the poorer people because it's rice, yet it still gives them all of the nutrients that they need. So if anything, the genetic crops will help.
I think that's enough said on that question. Now, moving on to the next question. Why do you think GMOs are considered bad, Michael?
Why do I believe that genetic modified organisms are considered bad? Because if you think of something that's been genetically modified, you imagine that it's been mutated, disgusting. You imagine it growing into a weird mutant beast that will take over the world and cause disease and everything. Whereas actually, genetically modifying crops does quite the opposite. You imagine a strawberry, nice, sweet, although you could have rather rotten strawberries. They grow, that's how life works. If you genetically modify a crop, most people, their intention would think a ginormous strawberry with arms and legs that is ripping through the town, killing everybody. That's the unscientific point. Other people may think that it's a strawberry that's going to spread disease. However, it's not. It's a big, red, juicy strawberry with added nutrients which could save lives. These people say that genetically modified crops would not save lives, it would harm people. And if it was spread throughout the world, people would die. But you think, what are you going to eat? Genetically modified crops or no food at all? According to the WFP, World Food Programme, some 795 million people living in the world do not have enough food to lead a healthy, active life. It's about 1 in 9 people on Earth. If you were to take crops, they don't need to eat that much, but the genetically modified crops will give them that healthy life.
Right, now George, why do you think GMOs are considered good?
Well, I don't think they're considered good at all. They may be able to tackle malnutrition problems by giving the people more food, but with the vitamin A deficiency, there was a study and it showed that none of the actual rice gave vitamin A to the people, and they were just in the same situation.
Objection?
Overrules. Carry on.
Thank you, sir. Also, there was from the Philippines, a chef, a quite famous chef, can't remember his name, just whizzed through my head, saying that the golden rice actually tastes a lot worse.
Objection!
And he would much prefer non-GM foods because they taste better and people see them as more natural. Also, we are not saying that GM crops are bad. We're saying that an excessive consumption of these GM crops are going to be bad. So you can use them to tackle malnutrition, yet you're going to need a healthier diet between half and half, roughly, of non-GM crops and GM crops to sustain a healthy balance so that you do not get these diseases and diseases cannot build up and spread throughout the world.
Wait, we're running out of time here on the show, so let's quickly move on to the next questions. Here's one specifically for you, Michael. Why should we buy GMO foods compared to normal food?
Okay. There are many different lifestyles throughout the world, right? And one of the major problems of the world is deforestation. We've all heard of in Brazil, those people with chainsaws hacking down the leaves, brutally slaughtering...
May I just remind you this is a PG show?
Less brutally slaughtering wildlife and killing the animals because they're losing their habitats just so that they can make farmland. What do they get out of this? Crops, yes, crops. Woo, crops. But if you could use GM crops, this could massively increase their yield of crops. Which means that if you have more crops in less space, that means you have to cut down less trees to plant the same amount of crops. Less trees to plant the same amount of crops. That means less animals are getting slaughtered because they don't lose their habitats. That means more rainforest, more conservation, less global warming.
Okay, I think we've heard enough
Wait,
now.
I've got one last thing to say. You say one of the main problems with genetic modification is that farmers, organic farmers, who struggle with organic foods are upset about GM crops. I will have you know, in 2010 a survey was taken of farmers in Britain and 71% of them questioned said that they chose genetically modified crops.
Okay, final question.
Can I make a point, please?
Okay.
You're a Christian, aren't you, Michael?
Yes.
So you have certain lifestyles that you have to follow.
Yes.
So if we filled the world with GM crops, it's going to help us tackle malnutrition. Even if we did build immunities to these diseases that they can give us after excessive consumption, what about the people who religion say they cannot eat unnatural foods? How are they going to be able to tackle with the widespread of GM crops which are going to end up spreading to their crops, even if they do build natural crops?
What is to
And
say?
eventually we're going to run out of natural crops.
What is
and
to say?
seeds.
The GM foods are unnatural. They are normal crops, just with slightly altered genes. But they're not genes that have been made. You don't get the scientists on a computer program designing, creating these new genes. They take the genes from the crops that decide. It's like selective breeding, except selective breeding takes years. Genetic modification takes much shorter than that. It's basically selective breeding on a short term.
But
Wait, we're really running out of time here. And we need to finish this quiz off, so we need to finish off this dispute so we can go back to our normal lifestyles. So, our final question is, do you think GMOs will be the future of our food? And we'll start here with George.
no, they can't be. If people eat GM foods all the time, they will get diseases. The diseases will build up and there will be no natural crops left in the world. People will be left not being able to follow their religion.
Objection.
Fine, quickly.
What? People are left not being able to follow their religion because there are no natural crops left in the world. Give me one religion and part of the extract from their holy book which strongly opposes genetic modification.
Gobsmacked. Problem is though, there are religions and there are cultures where you cannot eat GM foods.
They don't have to eat GM foods. They're not being
But
forced
then the
upon them.
but we've agreed that GM foods can go into adjacent fields. And they
Yes.
can spread around the world.
But if you
so
have
there
a
will be
culture...
no, I am talking. There will be no natural foods left in the world.
No. Right.
And you said...
Well, next week we'll be discussing
you haven't answered that last bit.
questions
Jim
about
Croft's future
euthanasia, whether it is morally
Because
right or
think of
morally
the
wrong.
animals
And
against
this has
cancer.
been the Triple W
Think of the
Show.
machetes, the guns,